If red meat causes cancer, why are cancer rates skyrocketing while meat consumption keeps dropping? Maybe the problem isn't the food we were designed to eat, it's the fake food or the Franken food, the chemicals and habits we've been trained to accept as normal. This episode isn't about fear, it's about pulling back the curtain on what's actually driving disease. Everybody, welcome. This is episode 7 of the Meet the Truth podcast. I'm your host, Jason Barrett. I'm the Carnivore Pharmacist. And today I'm just going to dive into 3 big root causes for what's actually driving some of these conditions, like cancer, and why they are the way they are. So, root cause number 1, toxic fuel source. Today we're inundated with so many types of quote unquote food. You heard me call them Franken foods just a minute ago. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into why I'm calling them those things and why they are problem number 1. They are enemy number 1, driving so many metabolic problems that opens the gateway to inflammation. And once inflammation is there, it is the gateway to every disease known to man. Some of the biggest things that we're surrounded with, especially in America these days, ultra processed carbs, seed oils, additives, coloring agents, preservatives. Those all light the fire for chronic inflammation. And when that fire burns long enough, it becomes the perfect fuel for disease, especially cancer. When it burns long enough, essentially it switches over to what's called chronic inflammation. That's inflammation that doesn't go away. And I have to pause real quick here to tell the difference between good inflammation and bad inflammation, because not all inflammation is bad. Acute inflammation is good. Let's say that you cut yourself or that you get stung by a bee. You're going to want, whenever it swells and it's kind of puffy, that's for a reason. That's because your body has kind of sent the troops there to, number 1, prevent it from getting infected, but also it brings healing to that area to enhance, or decrease the time that's going to take for your body to get better. When you go to the gym and do a rigorous workout and you're sore for the next couple of days, that's acute inflammation. That's good. That's good. Your body recognizes that there's a process there, and what it's doing is it's kind of rebuilding those muscles, and they're going to come back not just the way that they were, but they're actually going to come back stronger. That's pretty miraculous. So not all inflammation is bad, but when it's chronic inflammation, that means it's not going away. It's there. It's been activated by something. There is usually a cause, but a lot of times those causes are going unchecked. The symptom is being treated instead, and so you don't get better. You don't get better, and then you end up having to be put on a medication for the rest of your life, or you get labeled with something. It could be just a chronic inflammation. It could be arthritis. It could be some, there's dozens or hundreds probably at this point of different autoimmune diseases. They're all based in inflammation. There's something called the Warburg Effect, and it's in action whenever this is going. And basically it's just saying that even when oxygen is available, cancer cells keep fermenting sugar into lactate. They crave glucose. Cancerous cells do. They drown in it. If you cut the sugar, you starve the enemy. And so sugar, refined sugar is another one. It's the sweetest tasting poison on the planet. And trust me, if there's a person on this planet that loves sugar way too much, I'm convinced it's an addiction at this point, because as you know, I've been on carnivore for nearly 6 years at this point, and I don't crave it one bit. When I'm on carnivore and I haven't had it, I don't crave it. The sound of it doesn't sound good. If I see a sweet thing, I'm not even tempted. If it's been long enough, that's key. It has to have been long enough. But if I take one bite, let's say it's my birthday or it's a special occasion, holiday, anniversary, something, I'm on vacation, whatever it may be, and I take one bite, boom, a bomb goes off, a dopamine explosion. I summon the sugar monster, whatever you want to call it. And now I want every single, not just sugar, but every single carbohydrate inside. I will probably eat 20,000 calories on that day. It's not a healthy thing. It's almost an eating disorder or an addiction. I don't know what you want to call it, but the removal of that was huge for me because not only did it make me not crave sugar, but it made me not crave carbohydrates in general. And it's a good thing. And after going without them for so long, I realized I never needed them. I never needed them. We're feeding ourselves garbage and then we're blaming steak for the consequences. I mean, I don't know how that correlation ever came about. Maybe there's a weak study behind it where someone benefited, probably the sugar industry or someone in big food that did a study and blamed steak and said, "Oh, it's the cause of inflammation and the saturated fat is so bad for you, but go over here and eat these Franken foods instead." Look at what's happened since the food pyramid has been, invented. Root cause number 2, environmental and lifestyle load. So this is just more toxins. It's just not in the form of food. We've got plastics in our water, pesticides on our produce. We've got endocrine disrupting chemicals and cleaning agents and packaging. Poor sleep, blue light exposure, and endless stress amplify the damage. These days, you got to know, blue light is everywhere. It's basically the light that's indoors. Computer screens, smartphones, your TV. A lot of the lights that are just in a room are based in blue light because it provides the most. It's the most luminescent. The headlights on cars are blue light. There's so much blue light, and the problem with blue light is that we have photoreceptors in our eyes, in our that talks to our brain, and basically blue light tells us it's daytime. It tells our body to shut down melatonin production, which is our body's usually, before we had these blue light back in the day. When it got dark, then all of a sudden melatonin production started creeping up. You started to get drowsy. The bed sounded good. You went laid down. You fall asleep. You wake up the next day feeling good. Blue light can interfere with that, especially if you're doing it at times when you should be tired or you should be going to bed. If you're staring at your phone in bed, or if you're staring at a computer screen or a TV or whatever, when it's getting close to bedtime, it's going to interfere with your natural circadian rhythm. And even when you do go to bed, you're going to get poor sleep or you're going to get not enough sleep. And even if you do get some sleep, it's probably going to mess with the part of the sleep that's the most beneficial. And that's 2 different cycles. The REM sleep, you want to aim for about 90 minutes of REM. Nowadays, there's an easy way to track this. A lot of the smart devices like an Apple Watch, you can get an Aura Ring. There's the Fitbit. There's probably dozens at this point of different devices that you can wear that'll actually give you this feedback to tell you how much sleep you got and what quality it was. But the big ones are you want to get, around 90 minutes of REM sleep and also deep sleep, which is both of those. They're so beneficial for you from a recovery standpoint, from a detox standpoint. I mean, we're talking about toxins here. If your body can't detox, that's essentially saying it can't take the garbage out. It can't take the trash out once it gets full. Well, just like in your house, if you never took the trash out, what's going to happen? Your house is going to fill up with trash, you know? And if it can't take it out, it can't keep it clean and sanitary in there. And all of a sudden, boom, what do you think is going to happen? Inflammation and disease. And that's exactly what happens. I've been a pharmacist for 16 years. And so I've been filling prescriptions every day for the downstream effects of these exact same toxins. And people have no idea. They're pouring fuel on the fire of this inflammation, kind of prolonging it, making it last longer. And that's the whole reason why they ever had to go to the doctor. That's the whole reason why they're on a medication. And unfortunately, the vast majority of medications these days are, they're designed for disease management or just to treat the symptom. They're not there to treat the cause. And a lot of times, if people just knew that the cause was either the food that they're eating or their environment, they could really get a lot done without any medication at all. We've medicalized symptoms instead of fixing what's poisoning us. Root cause number 3 is the information corruption. There's weak epidemiological studies that become viral headlines, and that's not on accident. Some of these big major corporations, when they don't have a study to back up what they're trying to say, and they may be saying something that is only beneficial to them, then what they'll do is they'll fund these studies. They will be the ones who funded the study, which means it's probably, it could be designed to be very weak and to where it's going to have the outcome that they want. And then after it does have the outcome, even though it's the weakest study you've ever seen, they'll go, look, here's a study that said this is good for your health. Or, oh, look, here's a study that said red meat is terrible for your health. Go look, learn how to tell the difference between a good study and a bad study, because the majority of studies done, just because there was a study done doesn't mean it was good. Okay, there could have been who you need to know who funded it. You need to know how it was constructed. You need to know if there's actually causation or causation versus correlation, because a lot of times there's correlations and we can't just blame that because there's a correlation. If a house is on fire, the fire department is going to show up there 100% of the time. Are they the cause of the fire? No. They're there because there's a fire. They're there to put the fire out, but we can't. Every time I see a house on fire, there's a fireman there. It must be the fireman. You see how crazy that is? A lot of our studies are literally that stupid. They find a correlation and they automatically assume there's a causation. Read into it. Decide for yourself if that study is actually like a valid argument, because if it's not, and if someone stands to gain financially from that, question it. Question it. Big food funds research that demonizes meat. Big Pharma sells the cure for the sickness that they helped create. And big insurance profits when you stay on the treadmill. And when I say treadmill, I say basically the way it's constructed. My last episode really did a deep dive into this, so I encourage you to go back and listen to that one. But essentially, the way that it's designed is those three. I'll give you just a quick version here. They stand to gain from people with chronic inflammation, from chronic disease, because I'm going to tell you two different patients that are not profitable to any of those big three. Healthy people and people that are so sick that they die. Neither one of those are profitable, but the one in the middle, the one that has chronic disease, the one that's not sick enough to die, but is also not healthy, that has to go to the doctor, that has to take medications, that has to do lab work and diagnostic imaging and all the other diagnostics, and then usually only gets worse, develops new symptoms, or maybe develops side effects from the medications that they get put on. Well, guess what? Big food, they've created foods that are not only terrible for your health, that cause chronic disease and inflammation, but they're also highly addictive. They taste amazing. I'll be the first one to say processed garbage, fast food tastes amazing. Okay, it does. I'm not going to even try to say it doesn't. But they're terrible for you. They're frankenfoods. They're going in, they're causing disease, they're ruining the lining of your gut, they're causing oxidative stress. They're doing all these different things to your body that leads to disease, leads to cancer. And once you show up to the doctor goes, oh, well, you've got a chronic condition, you've got an autoimmune condition, you've got cancer, you've got whatever it is. Here's a medication. Okay, so big food, number one, they've got you hooked because you're on an addictive food that you're probably going to keep eating, especially when you're oblivious to the fact that it's the cause of your problem. You are a subscription to them. You're going to keep buying it. You're going to keep eating it. They're making money on you repeatedly. When you go to the doctor, guess what? They're going to give you a medication. They're going to treat you with something that only treats the symptoms or does disease management. It's not a one-time thing and then you're better. It's, you got this condition. There's no cure for it. There's all we can do is give you this medication. You're going to have to take it for the rest of your life. And you're going to have to keep coming seeing us. And you're going to have to keep doing the lab work and whatever else that has to be maintained going forward. Then you've got to go to the pharmacy and pick up these medications. And you've got to keep getting them, because what happens if you stop taking the medication? Symptoms return, right? The symptoms come back. Why is that? Because the root cause was never dealt with. And so big insurance is making money all the way down. Big pharma, and listen, I need to stop right here and make a clear distinction. I am not talking about individual physicians or pharmacists or even clinics and pharmacies. They're not the problem. And I promise you, they're not the ones that are making any money on this deal. It's the big pharmaceutical companies that are worth trillions of dollars that are funding these weak epidemiological studies that lead to people jumping on the bandwagon and believing that it's going to work. And then they find out once they get on it, they're not getting better. And unfortunately, they're all three of these big organizations, as long as you stay on that cycle, as long as you keep buying the food and you stay sick enough to have to go to the doctor, to then be put on the medications that are only going to treat the symptoms, and then you're probably going to develop new symptoms, or you're going to have new side effects, or you're going to have nutritional deficiencies or depletions due to the medications or the poor diet. You're going to develop new symptoms. You're going to have to. It's a vicious cycle. It's almost like a spider web. You walk in and then you can't get out. You've got all these subscriptions that you really didn't even want that you're having to pay for and you can't get rid of. It'd be like if you signed up for a Netflix, a Hulu, an Amazon, and a gym membership that you didn't even want, and you can't cancel them because if you do, you're going to suffer for it. It's almost, in a sick way, genius. I used to say the system's broken. After I'd been a pharmacist for a few years and I was seeing people, I went to school because I wanted to help sick people get better. And once I saw they weren't getting better, I'm like, you know what? Something wrong with the system. It's broken. It's not working right. You know what I mean? And then after a few more years of watching it more closely, I realized, and especially once I became the sick patient, which I'll talk about here in a minute, I realized system's not broken. It's working as designed. These three big organizations that I'm talking about, they made it this way on purpose. They knew. But if they could get that Goldilocks patient, the one that's not healthy, but not dead, but somewhere in the middle, that they could continue to milk them for profit. So stop and think about it. Stop and think about it. Like I said, I'm exposing the actual system itself because it was designed dysfunctionally, and it was designed to treat and not heal most of the time. The individual doctors and pharmacists and clinics no, I'm not blaming them. Health, it's not complicated. It's just corrupted. So yeah, let me just tell you a little bit about my personal story. And if you want the full story on this, I encourage you to go back to episode 1 where I give the long version of my story where I include about as much as I can. But essentially what happened is for over a decade, I actually got sick myself. I had chronic inflammation. I just powered through it, but it just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And I had chronic inflammation, fatigue, and confusion. I ended up going to a whole slew of doctors. I went to different specialists, eventually ended up with a rheumatologist, tried every drug that there is for inflammation in the pharmacy. They started me with steroids, and then I did all the NSAIDs and the DMARDs, which are common for anybody that goes to a rheumatologist that has some sort of inflammatory condition. Then I got labeled with multiple autoimmune diagnoses: ankylosing spondylitis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, and on every single medication I took, there was no lasting relief. They all had side effects. Some of them pissed off my liver. Some of them pissed off my kidneys, whatever. And I had to stop taking them. And so finally, after several years of frustration and only getting sicker, I went and my rheumatologist said, you know what, it's time for the big guns. And I'm like, oh, the big guns. What are the big guns? And he said, that's going to be biologics. We're going to start you on Embrel, which that one, you may have seen a commercial for that one. It's very expensive. These are very powerful immunosuppressive agents. And the problem with that is that I knew what they were as a pharmacist, and I knew that they were not risk-free, not even close. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. What would happen is, yeah, they did provide the most relief because they suppress the immune system greatly, and so your body cannot produce the inflammation that it's trying to produce because there is a problem. There is something causing the inflammation. I found that out later, several years later. But the problem with these immunosuppressive agents like Imbrel and these biologics is that they actually turn down your entire immune system. And so when you need your immune system, it's not there. Two big ones are going to be any sort of infectious thing, whether it be a spider bite or the common cold or COVID or maybe something more serious. If you got just a simple infection, your immune system couldn't send the cavalry and deal with it the way it used to. It couldn't build the proper immune response, and any little infection could actually become very serious, and it could even be fatal. And so, if you ever got any sort of sickness at all, you had to stop taking the medication. And as soon as you did that, your inflammation went to level 12,000. And so you suffered from your old symptoms while your immune system battled off whatever illness you had. And then once it beat down the infection, you could bring the drug back, which then brought the inflammation down, but raised your risk again for another infection. The other thing it does, and this is a big one, is a lot of people don't realize, but one of the big things that the immune system does on a daily basis from the time you're born until the day you die is cancerous cells pop up. They just do. It's part of it. It's part of life. And your immune system normally, if it's functioning, especially if it's optimally functioning, it can identify these rogue cells, these cancerous cells. They can tell they're acting weird, and it marks them, and it says it sends the cavalry, and it says, listen, eliminate that cell. It's gone rogue. It's bad. It's causing problems. We need to get it out of here. And bam, it's very effective. It kills it, gets rid of it. And so you remain cancer free. But what if you suppress your immune system on purpose with a medication on purpose? Like I said, you are inhibiting your own immune system from being able to do its job. And so it raises your risk for several different types of cancer. And so I knew that in the back of my head that I had these major risks by taking this medication. Unfortunately, I was so debilitated and so desperate for some relief that I went ahead and took them. But unbeknownst to me, they don't last forever, even though they did provide some relief by 3 to 6 months later. It's not nearly as effective as it was on day one. And so I went through a whole bunch of those. Finally, I said, listen, I got to get some answers. I'm only getting sicker, even with the most powerful big gun drugs you got. Refer me to the Mayo Clinic. I went up there and no better. I mean, I got basically the same treatment. I got sent home. Nothing major changed. And eventually, what happened was I had some significant erosion happening at C1 and C2, right at the very top of my spine where the skull connects to the top of your spine. It showed up on an image, and multiple doctors were concerned. They referred me to a neurosurgeon, and they basically said, hey, those two vertebrae, we're not sure what's causing the erosion. That's kind of weird. We don't even know what to tell you on how that happens or whatever, but it's becoming so thin and brittle that we're afraid it could fracture quite easily. And just like a spinal injury, it affects everything below it. So depending on how high up the spine it is, you could be a paraplegic, you could be a quadriplegic, or you could die. They said the problem with it being at C1 and C2 is that C3 controls your respiration, which basically they said you could die, like if you had take a fracture there. And I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do? I'm talking to the neurosurgeon, and he's like, listen, we don't really have a whole lot of good options. He said, normally if it's further down on your, say it's down at C4, 5, or, down there, he said, we can do a nerve block and an ablation where we kill the branching nerve that comes off, and it'll relieve the pain, and it can provide quite a bit of relief, and then you can recover. So the problem is at C1 and C2, there's no branching nerves. All you have is the central spinal, nerve. We can't ablate that. That would kill you. And I'm like, okay, what do we do? And then the only other option was an extremely invasive surgery that was debilitating. And he said, I wouldn't encourage it on anybody. He said it's a last resort. So essentially, he said, we're just going to watch and wait. We're going to keep doing imaging, see if it continues to get worse. If it gets worse and worse, we will have no choice but to do this terrible surgery. And so I'm thinking, okay, I am desperate at this point. If any doctor came to me and said, hey, I can help you, but this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to stand on your head and drink vinegar through your nose 3 times a day. I would have done that with a smile on my face if it would have worked. Well, the funny thing is shortly after that, I was talking to a few colleagues of mine, and one of them said, "You know what? I've heard of some patients getting some massive relief on the carnivore diet, and they have some weird symptoms, kind of like yours. I'm not saying it could help you, but you might look into it." And so I did, and I did. I found out that it had helped a lot of weird. It didn't make sense to me because what I had learned, was what everybody learns, but I'd also learned it in pharmacy school was that, they kind of demonized red meat. They said we needed to limit it because it's massively inflammatory and it can cause gout and it's got saturated fat, which is going to clog all my arteries. I'm going to get colon cancer. There's no fiber, so I'm going to be constipated like just permanently. And based off of those assumptions, I guess I should say, because they were false. um, and maybe fear of that. I'm not sure. I had never tried it before. I'd never really considered it. Even though I had tried a lot of other diets, I'd never tried that one. And I said, you know what? They're telling me I'm going to die anyway. I got nothing to lose. I'm going to try it for 30 days. I don't think it's going to work, but I'm going to do it. Guys, this is the part of the story where I can't put enough emphasis on how powerful this was for me. It was like magic. It was like a miracle, literally within 10 days or less. It's not like I was counting on a calendar. All I know is it happened quickly. I felt the inflammation going down inside my body for the first time in well over a decade than any of those medications, including the big guns or any other diet. And it wasn't close. I'm talking it was like 100 times more powerful, like not close. I couldn't believe it. I was in disbelief. I looked at my wife and I said, you ain't gonna believe this. But if there is no way I'm stopping this diet at day 30, if it continues to go the way it's going. And sure enough, it did. So I did another 30 and another 30, and then I did another 90, and then I did another 180. And before I know it, a whole year had gone by. And by now, literally all my symptoms, I had symptoms head to toe that, all of including the crazy pain in my neck was completely gone. And I'm in disbelief at this point. Not only that, I had started sleeping better, recovering better. I was in a better mood. I wanted to go work out. It wasn't like, oh, I got to go work out. It was like, let's go work out, and started to put some muscle back on. By the end of that year, I'd lost 50 to 60 pounds. It completely changed my physiology. And unbeknownst to my rheumatologist, I wasn't taking the medication anymore because I didn't need it. I didn't need it. Now, I didn't tell her about the diet because two things. One, I knew she would say it was preposterous and crazy. And also, I didn't want to tell her that I wasn't taking my medications until I knew for a fact that, I didn't need them. So I went ahead for another maybe 6 to 12 months. I don't know. I didn't mark it on my calendar, but eventually I fired my rheumatologist. And to this day, 6 years later, I'm still on the diet and I don't even take a baby aspirin for inflammation. So you got to understand, I did not think this was going to work. This was a complete wake up call. It happened right when it needed to, but I had to get very desperate. I had to get very desperate. And so that's key. If you're not desperate enough, I don't, it would be hard to do. If I was otherwise healthy, there's no way I would just go on a massive elimination diet that's that restrictive. But when I got to that point, it was a no brainer. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And it blew my wildest dreams. So, essentially what happened was, once I finally stripped everything back to the basics. I just did meat, water, truth, you know, and salt. Everything changed. My body was able to heal truly, like literally were the medications that were only treating my symptoms and managing disease and making me continue to have to go to the doctor and take these medications. And not to mention I was pouring fuel on the fire with the food that I was eating before. When I switched it over to this, I just gave it only what it needed, and my body was able to, since it was no longer being just pounded by toxins, not only in the form of food, but also in the form of all the other ones we just talked about piling on. Once I was able to clean all that up, my body goes, thank God. And it had a break, and it was able to go to the source of where the fire of that inflammation was and actually start to put out the fire. That's really why I started this podcast, Meet the Truth, to speak from both sides of the counter, the pharmacist and the patient who finally woke up. So, I want one big thing is that cancer isn't random. It may seem random, but it's cumulative. It's the sum of everything we tolerate, not the fate we deserve. Um, like I said, there's different things that can feed cancer. There are carcinogens. There are known carcinogens. They know that cigarette smoke. They know that certain things cause those. Again, those are toxic agents that are going in, and what they do is they corrupt. They can basically damage the cells and poison them, because all cancer cells, it's not like they just pop up out of nowhere. It used to be a normally functioning cell, and then at some point it kind of became almost like a zombie cell. It's no longer working for you, and it replicates to the point where your body can't keep up with it, and it kills you. So, I can say, a few things. If you want to decrease your risk there's no way to decrease it to zero. Um, but if you want to decrease it, I would say simplify your inputs, move your body, protect your sleep, practice gratitude. Benazati, I was listening to a podcast with him on it the other day, and he had a beautiful concept. He was saying that a lot of people are deficient in a certain vitamin. The problem is this vitamin is completely free. You can't overdose on it. The only side effects are positive, and it's called vitamin G. It's gratitude. It's gratitude. Practice gratitude. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying don't make it transactional. Don't wake up and have a little checklist where you go, I am grateful for my house. I am grateful for my family. I am grateful for God. I am grateful for whatever. Actually sit down. Actually feel gratitude. Feel it inside you like an emotion. A lot of people that they'll say, I'm anxious, I have anxiety, I'm stressed. They know what that feels like. But then when they tell you they're grateful, it's just words. You don't feel the gratitude coming off them. You don't see it in their facial expressions. Now, sometimes you do. Don't get me wrong. Some people are great at showing their gratefulness to people. But it is something that you do generally have to work on, and you have to practice. It's not like anxiety that can just show up. You know what that feels like. You know that it feels wiry and chaotic and not good. Gratitude is literally on the opposite side of the spectrum of that. And honestly, when you are practicing real, actual gratitude, anxiety it can't even compete. Like, it just drives it out. It just overpowers it. It's on a higher frequency, and people around you will notice. And so I challenge you, one thing that I do, it's just a common practice for me. If I really want to practice gratitude, is I'll try to put on, like some noise canceling headphones and turn off the lights and close my eyes. And the reason I do that is because a lot of times we take for granted that we have eyes to see this beautiful world. And even then, to see the colors. There's some people that can't see colors. They can only see black and white, but they're still grateful that they can see. You could be totally blind and it's just totally black. You don't see anything. And then the same with hearing. If you couldn't hear music, if you couldn't hear my voice, if you couldn't hear anything, think if you lost both of those at the same time. Think if you couldn't see or hear, you'd still be alive. You could still taste and smell and touch. You could still think and you could still feel emotions, but you couldn't see or hear anything. Totally silent, totally black, everywhere in the world. How grateful would that person be to get their sight and their hearing back? How grateful would they be? Stop and think about that. That's real gratitude. And if you can go just temporarily remove them from yourself and think about, what that would feel like if you couldn't see and you couldn't hear, just how vastly different your life would be, even though you're still here. Think about how much different that would be. Then open your eyes and turn on some music and walk outside, and you tell me you're not feeling grateful. That's gratitude. Get hooked on that. That's an addiction that is only good. It is only positive. You will never have a negative side effect from that, and you'll never regret doing it, because once you get good at putting that on instead of anxiety and stress and worry and doubt and fear, you decide how you're going to be when you walk out that door. And there is nothing more powerful than that. The same system that taught you to fear red meat never warned you about seed oils. Ask yourself why. Why did they not? It's a fact. Go look at seed oils. They're so terrible. And it's mostly from the way that they're extracted. The way it's with high pressure and heat and oxygen and different things, and all those things oxidize the oil. Well, when it's oxidized, it's an extremely potent thing that adds to inflammation. And they put seed oils in everything. I mean, they put them in everything. They definitely are feeding into autoimmune diseases and cancer. They definitely are causing gut problems. They definitely are not doing a single good thing. And another thing I learned on the same podcast with Benazati recently was that the half-life on these things. Half-life to a pharmacist, that's a big deal. Every medication in the pharmacy has a different half-life, and it's very important. And let me just tell you what a half-life is, just in case you don't know. Half-life is the amount of time that it takes for your body to get rid of half of whatever's in you. So if you took 100 milligrams of a drug and it has a half-life of 1 hour, then in 1 hour, 50 milligrams of that is gone. And then in another hour, 25 of that 50 is gone. And so it keeps losing half and half and half. It keeps going down. Basically, that's what a half-life is. You know what the half-life of seed oils are? Not only are they like terrible and they put them in everything, and I mean they're in all your processed garbage. They're in stuff even like what you consider protein bars. And what I hate about seed oils also, before I tell you what the half-life is, I'll finish that here in just a second, is that, once they extract them like that, they're extremely rancid, they smell terrible, and what they'll do is they'll further process them. They'll treat it chemically to remove the rancidity, and then they'll use a deodorizer on it so that it removes the bad smell that it would have. And so to you, it doesn't smell bad anymore, even though it should. It's not rancid anymore, even though it really is. It's still oxidated. And then they have the audacity to throw organic, heart healthy on the label. So you go to the store, you pick it up, you put it on everything. You put it on your salad, you fry some potatoes in it, cook your eggs or whatever. Even there's a million different ways to use seed oils. They put them in salad dressings. They're used again in all the processed foods, all the fast foods. They're in everything these days, and the half, and then when they market it as healthy, there you go. You've just been sold. Oh, it says organic, says heart healthy. I'm buying that one. When in truth, you should buy the beef tallow or the butter or some of these naturally occurring animal fats that aren't oxidized, that aren't going to cause that same inflammation, but they've demonized those as well and scared you, on purpose into buying this cheap alternative that's terrible for your health because they don't care about your health. They care about making dollars. They care about the profitability. They care about their bottom line more than you. Back to the half-life. The half-life, 74 days. You heard me. 694 days. Not hours, not minutes, days. That means in basically 2 years, almost, half of it's still going to be in your body. If you don't consume any more for the next 2 years, half of it is still going to be there. And then in another 2 years, a quarter of it is still going to be there. That's why it's so detrimental and it's so imperative to, stop feeding this to ourselves, stop feeding this to our kids, because once an autoimmune thing shows up, if those things are in the body, and they probably are, if you've been eating anything close to the standard American diet, even if you stopped eating them today for the next 5 years, there's still going to be some amount. That is crazy. That is wild to think about. So, anyway, ask yourself those questions. If this episode hit home, share it with someone that's still afraid of steak. Share it with someone who's maybe you've had a conversation about the carnivore diet, and they're convinced it's going to give them colon cancer or explode their heart or cause constipation. Now, listen, I'm pretty specific about when I tell people that I think it would help them. If it's for weight loss, it's going to really depend on how bad you want to lose that weight. To me, it's easy to fall off that diet. It's easy to treat it more like a fad diet because, a lot of those fad diets are easy to start, kind of hard to maintain, and a lot of them are calorie restrictive. Carnivore is really not meant to be that way. And so, but if you treat it that way, or if you only eat a bunch of lean meats and you stay away from the fats, it's not going to work, because it's very important. Your fuel source is fat on carnivore. You need probably 80% of your calories coming from fat. I usually try to get somewhere between 1.5 and 2 grams of good fat versus for every 1 gram of protein that I have. The protein, you want that. Your body needs it. You need those amino acids to maintain your lean muscle mass. And so you don't want to burn that for calories. Um, we are primed. I mean, going all the way back to our ancestry, thousands and thousands of years, we are primed to run on fat. It's a very, very, very premium source of fuel. Guys, follow Carnivore X. I'm on all the different platforms. You can basically just look for Carnivore X. That's CARNIVRX on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, for evidence-based truth, not just industry spin. This is Meet the Truth, where logic meets lived experience and healing becomes simple again. And guys, if you know anybody that needs to hear this episode, please like, subscribe, share it with anybody who needs to hear it, because I know that I wish I had heard this, and that is the exact reason why I made this podcast. So guys, I appreciate you tuning in today, and until next time, stay good.